I've got a toilet with an old-fashioned ball cock that's been running, and what we're going to do is replace it with a newer style fill valve, and we'll go through the steps one by one. The first step is to shut the valve off that fills the tank, and I had to put a wrench on it to break it free, and you can hear the water stop. So we turn it clockwise till the water stops, and the next step is going to be flushing the tank and letting out all the water. Now I flushed the tank and I left the handle up so that we could get as much water out as we could, but you can still see there's a little bit of water standing there. So we're going to have to put a bucket underneath the tank, and as we take off the supply line to the tank, it's going to leak a little bit, so you'd want a bucket underneath there. Next we're going to use an adjustable wrench, and we're going to loosen the nut right at the bottom of the supply line. And once we loosen that nut at the bottom of the supply line, we're going to use an adjustable pliers, and we're going to loosen the nut right here at the bottom of the tank. And once we have those two nuts loose, we're just going to remove this supply line. Now that I've taken off the supply line, I'm going to loosen this nut at the bottom of the old ball cock, and once I remove that, it's going to be very easy just to pull the old ball cock straight out of the tank. So I've loosened the nut at the bottom of the supply line, the top of the supply line, and I removed the nut at the bottom of the ball cock. Now I'm just going to pull this straight up, and we're going to be able to remove the whole assembly. See why we needed that pan underneath the tank, and then we're going to start putting together the new fill valve. So this is the old ball cock we pulled out of there, and we'll put together the new one. Okay, this is a pretty typical setup of the new fill valves, and what's nice is rather than the float extending out here, the float is connected to the shaft, which really makes it mechanically much easier for this to shut off the valve when the water fills up in the tank. So you're going to take the washer off the bottom of this little group, and you're going to push out the center piece, and then you're going to take this washer, and with the bevel down, you're going to put it on the bottom of the fill tube, and this is what's going to keep it from leaking inside the tank. The fill valve is held in place with just one nut underneath the tank, so we're going to put the valve in the tank, and we're going to tighten her up. What's nice about this fill valve is we can adjust it from 9 inches to 14 inches. By loosening this collar, we can adjust it for a very high tank or drop it down for a lower tank. And so for this toilet, we're going to leave it right about 10 inches. I'm going to lock it in place, and then we're going to put it into the tank. So it's real easy to put the new fill valve in place. We're just going to take it. It's going to drop down into the hole. We're going to be pointing out the float toward the center of the tank, and then we're going to go underneath, and we're just going to attach it with this nut. Alright, from underneath the tank, I tightened it by hand, and now we're just going to put another 3/4 of a turn on the nut. We're not going to over tighten it too much. It's all plastic. And once we fill the tank, if it needs to be tightened a little bit more, we can tighten it then. Once we have the fill valve in place, we're going to connect the refill tube to the side of it, and we're going to connect it to a fitting that keeps it just above the overflow pipe here. If we were to take the tube and just shove it down into this pipe, what it can do is siphon out water, and that will keep the fill valve constantly trying to fill the tank. So very simple here, and now we're going to connect the supply line. Now we're going to connect the supply line to the shutoff valve. Most shutoff valves that you're going to see underneath your kitchen sinks or in the bathroom or connected to a toilet have a compression thread. So we're going to need a unique thread count on the bottom of the supply line, and then we're going to have 7/8 on top. Alright, this is the old supply line that was connected to the tank, and I'm going to change it with a newer flexible supply line. I didn't know how the length of this, so I grabbed a couple different ones, and you can see that it's going to be very difficult to line these up with this height. So luckily this longer one, what I'm going to do is just put a nice soft bend to it, and we're going to be able to line it up like this. So if you're going to make a mistake, always get a supply line that's longer. That way you can put a nice soft loop into it, and you'll be able to connect pretty much any size or any distance between the valve and the bottom of the tank. I just want to cover this supply line real quick. It's very unique. If you don't know the shutoff valve that you have, whether it's 3/8 compression or 1/2 inch compression, this has two fittings inside here that you screw onto the bottom. So you can actually screw it onto an old-fashioned valve that's 1/2 inch iron pipe, and it has two different compression fittings in here, one for 3/8 compression, which is probably the most common, and then also 1/2 inch compression. So if you're in a hardware store and you don't know what size you need, this is a great one to grab. It's a fit-all. Okay, I connected the supply line to the shutoff valve on the bottom with an adjustable wrench, and I connected the top of the supply line to the fill valve with an adjustable pliers. And now we'll turn it on and see what happens. Alright, the fill valve did its job and filled the tank, and we're going to want it to shut off just below the level of the overflow pipe. And to make any adjustments, there's a rod here that you can turn to adjust the float up or down. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is check, just to make sure we have no leaks under the tank. We're going to check the valve, and then we're also going to check the connection, the fill valve to the tank, and then the supply line to the fill valve. And once all those are adjusted, you're done. So pretty straightforward if you need to replace a valve on a toilet.